facilitated each other. I'm sure that this heritage will help us rebuild and foster mutually beneficial and equal ties at this new stage, even during the hardest conditions. It is known that there have been no summits between Russia and the U.S. for 4 years, and that's a long time. This time was very hard for bilateral relations, and let's be frank, they have fallen to the lowest point since the Cold War. I think that's not benefiting our countries and the world as a whole. It is apparent that sooner or later we had to amend the situation to move on from the confrontation to dialogue. And in this case, a personal meeting between the heads of state has been long overdue. Naturally, under the condition of serious and painstaking work, and this work has been done in general. Me and President Trump have very good direct contact. We've spoken multiple times. We spoke frankly on the phone. And Special Envoy of the President, Mr. Witkoff, traveled out to Russia several times. Our advisors and heads of foreign ministries kept in touch all the time. And you know fully well that one of the central issues was the situation around Ukraine. We see the strive of the administration and President Trump personally to help facilitate the resolution of the Ukrainian conflict. And his strive to get to the crux of the matter, to understand this history, is precious. As I've said, the situation in Ukraine has to do with fundamental threats to our security. Moreover, we've always considered the Ukrainian nation, and I've said it multiple times, a brotherly nation, however strange it may sound in these conditions. We have the same roots, and everything that's happening is a tragedy for us and terrible wound. Therefore, the country is sincerely interested in putting an end to it. At the same time, we're convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots, the primary causes of that conflict. And we've said it multiple times, to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance of security in Europe and in the world on the whole. And I agree with President Trump, as he has said today, that naturally the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. Naturally, we are prepared to work on that. I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring closer that goal and will pave the path towards peace in Ukraine. We expect that Kiev and European capitals will perceive that constructively and that they won't throw a wrench in the works. They will not make any attempts to use some backroom dealings to conduct provocations to torpedo the nascent progress. Incidentally, when the new administration came to power, bilateral trade started to grow. It's still very symbolic. Still, we have a growth of 20%. As I've said, we have a lot of dimensions for joint work. It is clear that the U.S. and Russian investment and business cooperation has tremendous potential. Russia and the U.S. can offer each other so much in trade, digital, high-tech, and in space exploration. We see that Arctic cooperation is also very possible, and our international context, for example, between the Far East of Russia and the West Coast of the U.S. Overall, it's very important for our countries to turn the page, to go back to cooperation. It is symbolic that not far away from here, at the border between Russia and the U.S., there was a so-called international date line. I think you can step over, literally, from yesterday into tomorrow. And I hope that we'll succeed in that, in political sphere. I would like to thank President Trump for our joint work, for the well-wishing and trustworthy tone of our conversation. It's important that both sides are result-oriented, and we see that the President of the U.S. has a very clear idea of what he would like to achieve. He sincerely cares about prosperity of his nation. Still, he understands that Russia has its own national interests. I expect that today's agreements will be the starting point, not only for the solution of the Ukrainian issue, but also will help us bring back business-like and pragmatic relations between Russia and the U.S. And in the end, I would like to add one more thing. I'd like to remind you that in 2022, during the last contact with the previous administration, I tried to convince my previous American colleague, that the situation should not be brought to the point of no return when it would come to hostilities. And I said it quite directly back then, that it's a big mistake. Today, when President Trump saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war. And I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that. I think that overall, me and President Trump have built a very good, businesslike and trustworthy contact. And I have every reason to believe that moving down this path, we can come, and the sooner the better, to the end of the conflict in Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. That was very profound. And I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They're going to have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here, Scott and John Radcliffe. Thank you very much. But we have some of our really great leaders. They've been doing a phenomenal job. We also have some tremendous Russian business representatives here, and I think everybody wants to deal with us. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world in a very short period of time, and we look forward to that. We look forward to dealing. We're going to try and get this over with. We really made some great progress today. I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin, with Vladimir. We had many tough meetings, good meetings. We were interfered with by the Russia hoax. That made it a little bit tougher to deal with, but he understood it. I think he's probably seen things like that during the course of his career. He's seen it all, but we had to put up with the Russia hoax. He knew it was a hoax, and I knew it was a hoax, but what was done was very criminal. But it made it harder for us to deal as a country in terms of the business and all of the things that we'd like to have dealt with. But we'll have a good chance when this is over. So just to put it very quickly, I'm going to start making a few phone calls and tell them what happened. But we had an extremely productive meeting, and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. I would like to thank President Putin and his entire team, whose faces, who I know in many cases, other than that, whose faces I get to see all the time in the newspapers. You're almost as famous as the boss, but especially this one right over here. But we had some good meetings over the years, right? Good, productive meetings over the years, and we hope to have that in the future. But let's do the most productive one right now. We're going to stop really 5, 6, 7,000, thousands of people a week from being killed, and President Putin wants to see that as much as I do. So, again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
breaking news coming in right now. The big global headline as Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin conclude their big meeting in Alaska. That comes in after their record amount of time that they spent together. Their longest meeting that the two leaders have spent so far. After that, there is no clear word in terms of a breakthrough, indicating that there will be a second meeting that will take place between the two leaders in terms of how soon this entire conflict will end. Let's get in my colleague Vishal joining us for more on this. Vishal Vivek joining us from the newsroom for more on this. This is the big breaking news that's coming in right now on NDTV. Viewers tuning in right now. It's early in India, but this is the big story that's been tracked around the world. Let's get in Vishal for more on this. Now, Vishal, this is something that the world is looking out for, watching. And across the world, there was anticipation whether or not there would actually be a breakthrough that will come in as far as the Russia-Ukraine conflict is concerned. Fantastic words spoken by both of them. They've been there for the longest meeting ever. There's potentially a second meeting which could take place in Moscow that hasn't been ruled out, but still no word on how the war ends from here on.
Yeah, Gauri, it's quite clear that there is no breakthrough as to the talks itself are concerned, because both the leaders did hail each other, hail the ties. They even, termed each other as not rivals but partners. But the pinpoint of the whole, talks, that is still undecided. Both the leaders have passed the baton to the next stage. When the meeting would be, where it would be, that remains to be seen. But as you mentioned, Russian President Vladimir Putin has proposed Moscow, the capital of Russia, for the next meet, to which Trump did seem surprised. He said he could face flack if he went to, Russia, because the last time any leader of, big leader of US went to Russia, that was quite a while ago. So that will have to be seen. So it's quite clear that these talks do seem to have some positive undertones, but the overall objective of achieving peace in Ukraine, that is still largely unanswered.
Indeed, that is largely unanswered, and this is a meeting that was being seen very, very closely even by the European allies of Donald Trump, and there's a lot of anticipation. In fact, the reason that this meeting has lasted longer than his own metric, where he said that I'm going to walk away minutes after the meeting if it doesn't lead to anything substantial, itself was seen as a very crucial metric as to whether or not this could lead to some sort of a breakthrough. But what we are really working with right now is the input, the takeaway of this summit is that there seems to be some positive ground. Again, we're just going by the very little statements that the two leaders have made. What we're going with is that there was a fantastic relationship. There were very cordial exchanges, longest meeting of the two leaders together, and the fact that there could be another summit this time around in Moscow. Donald Trump hasn't ruled it out. He said, in fact, his exact words were, it may get me into a little bit of a heat, but he said, I don't rule it out.
That is exactly right. And also, though the leaders seemed quite positive about the talks, but they have not really, jotted down what were the exact topics that were discussed, because it was quite vague in whatever they were saying. Trump said there are some things that need to be reconsidered. There's one particular topic that needs to be talked about again, but he did not really specify what that topic was. Probably the land swap deal is what is the most, the biggest topic of contention right now, because Ukraine has totally rebuffed the idea of swapping lands or giving away any territory to Russia that Russia has captured in the last 3 years. Russia, on the other hand, has been quite insistent on keeping that territory, so that could be that point. But the positive vibe that we were getting from the conference does seem to suggest that there was some progress made, because as you mentioned, Trump had threatened that he will walk away from the talks within minutes if he doesn't doesn't get the vibe that he wanted to. So these are some good signs. It was a really long meeting, almost 3 hours long. The top 3 leaders of Russia, top 3 leaders of US were there. From the US side, it was Steve Witkoff. and Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary, Trump himself, on the Russian side, it was the Sergei Lavrov was there, the foreign minister, and also Yuri Ushakov, who's been one of the longest-serving foreign policy advisors of Vladimir Putin and Putin himself. So these 3+3 gentlemen are deciding the future of Ukraine war as we speak, because Ukraine itself, the aggrieved party, has not been invited to the talks. So what reaction Zelensky has on this, that also will have to be seen.
Okay, so let's now talk about exactly the specifics that the two leaders said. There was a very short and very short briefing that took place after that very longest meeting between the two leaders, and what Donald Trump said was, we had an extremely productive meeting. Many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left out. Now, again, this is typical Trump style of speaking, so one cannot really know when he says very few, does it mean just the land swap, or is there something even lesser than that? Even that has been agreed to. There is no clarity on that. He said some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. Again, as I said, viewers, this is Trump-style diplomacy, where either there is hyperbole or there's very little specifics. And then he said, we didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. And if he gets there, that there being the exact issue that is being discussed, if the two leaders decide to get there on Russian soil, what does that mean about actually resolving the Russia-Ukraine conflict? Again, is something that we leave it to speculation, because really there are no answers at this stage. See you in Moscow next time is what Putin told Trump, and then he said, I'm not going to rule it out as well. Now, Vishal, if we were to look at it from the fact of the summit, the outcome, that of course is limited right now, but it also sets the stage for now 101 diplomacy. And let's tell our viewers this, that going into this meeting, the summit was decided and announced in just about a week's time. It started with 101, then it became 3-on-3, but there was also that crucial time when Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin rode in the beast, didn't it?
Yeah.
And that potentially gave the window for the two leaders to talk 101, which is their style, which is the way both the leaders like to do their diplomatic issues being handled, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And quite a few experts were surprised when, Putin just rolled into the beast, the Trump car, and just zoomed away because people were thinking there are no translators in the car, so how would they communicate? But then it appeared that Trump is quite comfortable with Putin's
Vishal,
English.
stay with us. I want to now get in Maha Siddiqui, a colleague who's tracking that meeting on ground in Anchorage. Maha, we've been on top of this story. You've been getting us all details. The summit has just ended. What is it that you're picking up? Because the leaders have actually given very little to really work with, besides the fact that there could be a second summit, this time on Russian soil.
The only thing that's coming through at the moment, Gauri, is that the meeting was not a failure, and the first step towards some sort of resolution of the Ukraine war has been taken. Because Donald Trump described the meeting as extremely productive. He also said that lots of points have been agreed upon, though he did not specifically mention which were the points that Russia has agreed upon and which have been left out. But he did say that now he's going to make a call to NATO and President Zelensky to update them about the conversation that has taken place here. And ultimately, the deal will be struck only when Ukraine and the rest of the European allies are on board. An interesting point, Gauri, that Donald Trump made, him being a businessman at heart, that there is no deal unless there is a deal. So that's, again, an underlined fact here that no deal has been struck here, but perhaps the groundwork has been done for the deal to happen. What President Putin pointed out here, and he has said this in the past as well, so no real surprise here. First of all, he's stressing on the root cause of the problem. So what does he mean by that? Will Ukraine have to give up its claim ever to a membership of the NATO? That is something that is certainly unacceptable to Ukraine. But when President Putin mentions that as one of the points, as the root cause, when he says, and he's called this one of the root causes in the past, then one has to think about whether things can actually move forward even after this first step. So things Unclear at the moment, as you're rightly assessing the situation, Gauri. But I would say it wasn't a complete failure simply because the two leaders came out and addressed a joint press conference on the podium. They did not take any questions. In fact, Vladimir Putin was bombarded with some questions by reporters inside before the meeting started about whether he'll stop killing civilians, whether he'll agree to a ceasefire, whether the US should trust his words today. He did not respond to those. Of course, the leaders had to go for their meeting. But certainly, it appears that even if one step has been taken forward, some sort of a progress perhaps has been made. But we'll get more details as and when President Trump speaks to NATO leaders, speaks to NATO specifically, and European leaders and the Ukraine president.
Indeed, Maha, absolutely. You're right about the fact that right now there are limited details, but most certainly the summit seems to have passed the metric that Trump himself had set out, which is that I'm going to walk out if it isn't leading to anything substantial within minutes. And so his own, by his own estimate, his own metric, the summit hasn't been a failure at all. What it leads to now here, the roadmap the two leaders identified from here remains to be seen. Also, the fact that they had a one-on-one, they did, this is the style of the two leaders, isn't it, Maha? They did that the last time they met in Helsinki, this time around as well. While the structured meeting had it was 3+3, but the two leaders did speak to each other in that ride in the Beast.
Well, that ride would have been pretty small, but the gesture or the optics of that really important, as you're mentioning there, Gauri, and several other optics also very important here. First of all, the greeting on the red carpet there, the handshake. In fact, President Trump used both his hands for welcoming President Putin while shaking his hand. Apart from that, as you rightly mentioned, the ride in the Beast, again, something that was significant there. And the smile that President Trump gave before the 3-on-3 or 3+3 meeting started between the two sides. There was quite a change in the schedule. Initially, it was scheduled that there will be a proper structured one-on-one meeting between the two leaders. That was replaced by this narrow format meeting of 3+3, wherein their foreign ministers were there. On the American side, Steve Witkoff was there. On the Russian side, Yuri Ushanov was there. And it was expected later that the larger delegations will come in after the one-on-one. That larger delegation meeting then, of course, was given up because this meeting itself went on for over 2.5 hours. And after which the press conference, which was slated for about 45 minutes after actually it started today, the press conference, therefore, also happened much earlier. So even though we've seen a lot of change in the schedule today, at the end of the day, the two leaders coming out together and addressing the media, the joint press conference actually happening, does give a sense that progress has been made. Otherwise, as you rightly mentioned, President Trump had said that he would walk out of the meeting if things didn't go his way. He had also said that within minutes of the meeting, he'll be able to gauge whether President Putin is interested in a peace deal or not. So perhaps his assessment is that President Putin also wants to end the war. He did say that President Putin is on board, that thousands of people are getting killed and that needs to end. So we'll have to wait to see whether the demands that are now being discussed are acceptable to Ukraine, are acceptable to the larger continent of Europe. That really is the crux of the matter at the moment.
Right. Indeed, I would have asked that, does this make Donald Trump eligible for a Nobel? But before that, I want to ask, Baha, the other thing where Mr. Putin also said that Trump understands that Russia has its own interests. And, this is the first time that Russia is getting a chance to explain why it felt that this war was important, and why it felt that its peace formula needs to be discussed in detail. And the fact that the talks went on from there, they did not break down. And even now what we're working with is the official word, which is that there was progress. What does that indicate in terms of how soon there could be the second summit? What could be the finer details of the breakthrough that really is needed for the war to end?
None of those contours have, in fact, been expressed in the press conference today as to whether this will lead to a second meeting, though it was indicated earlier by President Donald Trump that this would be the first step and the second meeting would be a larger one with the Ukrainian president, the European allies, America and Russia all together. So if we go by that, then this could be the first step towards that meeting. But at the end of the day, as Ukraine has pointed out, that it was Ukraine that was at the receiving end of Russia's war. And therefore, if it's not part of the conversation, then it will not accept any of the terms of the peace agreement. So Ukraine needs to be brought into the loop, which is going to happen soon when the calls are going to be made to Ukraine and NATO. And only then will we know whether there is a possibility of another meeting and whether this will ultimately lead towards some sort of a peace deal. As far as President Putin's reasons for waging this war against Ukraine is concerned, he has been talking about this for the last 3.5 years, Gauri. But this is an argument that Europe doesn't buy. Europe, for instance, the issue of Ukraine wanting to become a member of NATO. Ukraine says that it is the sovereign right of a country to choose which security alliance they would want to be a part of. Russia, on the other hand, has been saying that it would have threatened its security on its western border, something that is unacceptable to Russia. Now, many experts have in the past said that they do not buy this argument that this was the reason for the invasion of Ukraine, because they point out to the Charter of NATO itself, which does not want to accept members where there is any territorial dispute. And for Ukraine, Crimea was already disputed because Russia had already annexed that. So it would have taken Ukraine really long, even if at all it put in a request to become a member of NATO. And therefore, many experts don't buy that argument. They have been suggesting that these were the imperialistic ambitions of President Putin that broke out in the form of a war. There is some sort of a vague theological explanation also that is given for the war, Ukraine and Kiev itself being very significant for the Russians. And today, interestingly, Gauri, the Russian president also mentioned when he talked about Alaska and the shared history of US and Russia in Alaska, he spoke about how the Russian Orthodox Church that still exists in Alaska and was established when this territory was under Russian rule. He did make a mention of that as well. So there are so many layers over here which are really hard to distinguish, decipher, because all these issues have been conflated, and that is why the resolution of this war has been so hard to get by.
Absolutely, Maha, and stay with us. I want to go back to Vishal as well. Vishal, now the other thing that Putin said in that very brief press statements, they didn't take any questions, but he said that this war would not have started if Donald Trump had been in office. Now, that's a claim that Trump has made again and again. The 2020 election itself is a separate issue altogether. We're not going into that. But that claim, that reassurance coming in from Vladimir Putin, is there any indication of the talks, the direction in which they went, the possibility of an early breakthrough, and how soon we could potentially see that roadmap being identified and publicly talked about?
Well, Gauri, though this whole episode seems to be quite vague, spoke at length about their ties, termed each other as not rivals but friends, but it remains to be seen what exactly the details are, because Trump has said that he will make some calls now, he'll speak with the other stakeholders such as NATO, such as Zelensky, because Zelensky had just commented moments ago that he expects US to bat for it, because it has repeatedly said that Putin is not ready to back down, he will not stop the war, and Zelensky on the other hand has been repeatedly saying that there could be trilateral talks, but there needs to be a ceasefire. So it's a deadlock situation. How Trump and Putin navigate through it, how Trump actually navigates through it, that will have to be seen, though he seemed quite positive. That itself is a big sign. But there's no detail as to share as to how this will progress further. But there will be more meetings. Putin has proposed a meeting in Moscow. That's a tall order for now. But there will be indeed meeting probably at a neutral venue where some top leaders from both the sides, probably from all the three sides, US, Russia and Ukraine, engage in further discussions. Zelensky has repeatedly proposed a meeting with Putin, meeting with top level of Russian officials, but Putin mostly has rejected that and has not been interested in meeting Zelensky. So that if that changes, that will be the biggest development coming out of this meeting.
Absolutely, that will be the most important takeaway as far as going forward. But viewers tuning in right now, the big breaking news that we are putting out right here first on NDTV, which is that the summit, the Alaska summit between Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin has concluded. The longest face-to-face meeting between the two leaders surpassed the time they met in Helsinki. Stakes have been higher since then. But as things stand right now, they're likely to meet again. But right now, there is no deal until there's a deal. That's what Donald Trump has said. In typical Trump style, he said, we've made progress, big significant issues have been addressed, one significant issue remains, and whether that will be thrashed out in Moscow is the key question. Now, Maha, let's also take our viewers through the fact that there was this 3+3 meeting that took place, 3 people from the American side, the 3-member delegation on the Russian side, the significance of that and why it was changed from a one-on-one formal structured meeting to one that had was actually 3 people on each of the side of the delegations.
Well, Gauri, there is no official explanation for why this change in schedule happened. And it happened right at the last moment, just about 40 to 45 minutes before the meetings were supposed to start. White House officials confirmed to those, the spray pool inside the joint base that this will now be a 3+3 meeting rather than a one-on-one. Now, there could be several reasons for it. First could be the time constraint, considering that it was decided that there'll be a one-on-one. Then during lunch, the larger delegations will join in. Perhaps it was decided that considering that there is an interpreter as well, there is translation to happen, it will take away some time. It was best to have it in a 3+3 format. But honestly, there is no official explanation for that. So at the moment, it is very hard to guess, and especially because things were changing so rapidly. And even though they had some time afterwards, there was almost about an hour left after the 3+3 meeting had concluded for the press conference to start. The press conference also started much earlier than it was scheduled for. It was scheduled for 3:30 p.m. local time here, which would have been 5 a.m. Indian Standard Time. So it started much earlier. In fact, it ended even before its scheduled time to begin. So, I mean, one could interpret this as perhaps Donald Trump thinking that that there is a possibility of a deal at the moment. So let's just get what the demands can be met by Russia and take them to Ukraine for the next level of meeting. He already said that there's no deal till there is a deal. So in some sense, even while he's giving us a positive or an optimistic outlook, as a businessman himself, before being a president, he knows that there are many a slip between the cup and the lip. And therefore, this was just a meeting to understand the Russian side, and this 2.5 hours were enough to do that. So there could be several explanations and reasons for that. The importance of the leaders, the accompanying the delegation, of course, 2 of them were foreign ministers, so they were there. As far as Steve Witkoff is concerned, he is a special representative, special envoy for the president. There has been some criticism in America about him, he having, in fact, visited Moscow as well. And there were visuals of him seen walking around in Moscow. Certain people were critical about that as well, about his background, him being a real estate lawyer. That is also something that a lot of people have raised, saying that he has no political or so to speak, foreign policy acumen to really be in that room that is discussing such an important issue of bringing an end to a war that has been going on for 3.5 years. Gauri, before I end this answer, I also want to quickly draw your attention to what President Putin said in the end, saying that why don't we have the next meeting in Moscow? And President Trump said, well, that will generate a lot of heat. So really, I mean, historically, if you look at it, it was like how many people would have imagined a Russian president on a joint military base in US being welcomed by the US president and a warm handshake being given there.
Absolutely. The optics there. And Maha, he ended. Trump ended by saying, I can see getting some heat, but I cannot rule it out. It's possible. That's what he said in the end. That last two words tell you. And also the optics here. And Vishal, I'm going to come to you for that as well. But Maha, the optics here. And let's get at that big wins for Putin as well. For our viewers tuning in to really understand in diplomacy, every move, every gesture matters, and that's how messaging is sent out. First and foremost, visit to a US military base for Putin, the warm greeting that he got. Many European allies said that there was a red carpet welcome that was being accorded to the Russian president by Donald Trump. And the third important point as far as the win is another delay in terms of secondary sanctions. There's been a lot of talk about it. It hasn't happened. So that window, the economic window that is crucial for the Russian war machinery continues. And lastly, the fact that summit buys time to be able to continue the war as things stand. There's no cessation of hostilities. There's no interim ceasefire, none of that. Just and that window is equally important. And Maha, may I add, in terms of some of these wins, the last fact, you've covered a lot of foreign delegations, you've covered a lot of these events. How many times does the foreign dignitary actually gets to start first? And I think that's extremely significant as well. Every gesture, every such move matters in terms of overall messaging.
Well, absolutely. And you laid out quite correctly the optics that played out today is certainly something that will now be analyzed point by point by various experts to see what it could have indicated. In fact, even specifically, Gauri, bilaterally for Russia and America. After all, this relationship has always intrigued the world. And President Putin today also made a mention of the Cold War. And in that context today, to see the two sides meeting on a US military base and also the fact that there were issues that were of bilateral nature that came up, which also give us a sense of whether this was just a move about Ukraine, which of course it was on the face of it, and specifically because President Trump, his personal ambition to have a Nobel Prize is also perhaps hinged on this being instrumental in bringing an end to the Ukraine war. But Gauri, if you saw that several bilateral issues were mentioned between the two sides, especially by President Putin, if I can recall correctly, where he was talking about the economic deals that they can have in the sector of tech. Critical minerals is one sector which has been speculated here in the US that it is possible that there could be some Russian investment in Alaska, and it hasn't gone down well with a lot of political leaders here who believe that this critical sector is not where there could be an involvement of a country that was not too long ago not trusted at all by the United States. So there are so many layers today in the meeting, apart from only the issue of Ukraine. If you also look at the economic angle of bilateral cooperation between Russia and the United States, I think that is also something that will be analyzed. And all these optics that you've just mentioned of the red carpet, the handshake, Putin going ahead first, speaking about what came out of the meeting, all those can be very closely tied to this bilateral aspect as well.
Vishal, let me come in. Let me get you in there in terms of Donald Trump saying that now he will reach out to NATO, to European allies to let them know in terms of the specifics. Hopefully, there'll be more specifics than what we are working with in terms of how this meeting actually went. And, taking on from what Maha just said, which is that a lot of European allies of America have also been, thinking that a large part of this summit is actually going to focus upon the Russia-America bilateral relationship and not focus on ending the war?
Yeah, that also, propels from the fact that Vladimir Putin himself had said that the sides could even discuss, nuclear weapons, the ties between both the nations when it comes to nuclear weapons, because the big treaty between Russia and US that, puts limits on nuclear weapons for both the sides, that is set to expire in February next year. So that was supposed to be one of the topics of discussions. Whether or not that figured in these talks, that will have to be seen. But the experts, EU leaders, Ukrainian leaders specifically, they were all concerned that their side of the story will not be discussed. But that doesn't seem to be the case so far, because Putin himself has said that Ukraine's interests are also to be considered. Those were not the exact words, but he did mention Ukraine in a positive way, which is a big departure from tradition, because he had always clamped down when it comes to Zelensky, when it comes to Ukrainian side of the story. But that is one small sentence from Putin that signifies that there has been some positive development when it comes to the Ukraine war. That itself could be a signal that this war could come to an end anytime soon. The timeline is difficult to ascertain at the moment, but these are some really positive signs.
Very positive signs right now. The meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin has been the longest that the two leaders have come face to face. Viewers, the big breaking news that we are getting for you first here on NDTV. The Alaska summit has ended between the Russian and American presidents. It hasn't led to ending the Russia-Ukraine conflict. There's no deal in terms of whether there's a ceasefire or cessation of hostilities or any broader political resolution to this conflict. But there are positive takeaways. There will be a second summit. Could be in Moscow as well, hasn't been ruled out. The two leaders spoke on a variety of issues. The understanding is it could have been much broader than just the Russia-Ukraine conflict. A lot of issues related to the bilateral trade partnership between Russia and America is also likely to have featured in that meeting. Now, the next steps in terms of the roadmap for ending the conflict, the roadmap for the next discussion that may potentially include Ukrainian President Zelensky is what we are now waiting for. Just like the world, just like American allies in Europe, NATO, all of them are also waiting for some updates. They've been extremely apprehensive about this summit from the very beginning. They'll be even more so if this is followed up by a summit that actually takes place in Moscow. Now, Maha, going into this summit, Donald Trump also said that I'm going to have the next summit with the Ukrainian President Zelensky as well. So does this then set the stage for the next summit to actually talk about details of ending the conflict potentially? This could be probably just setting the stage, laying the groundwork, and maybe the second summit, as and when it takes place, could actually be about the nitty-gritties of finding a resolution to ending the conflict.
Well, certainly one can say that the groundwork has been laid here with President Trump now playing the role of a facilitator, perhaps, and speaking to NATO and Ukraine about what he was told by the Russian President Vladimir Putin today. But a disappointment for many would be in the fact that at least during this meeting, in the 2.5 hours, the American side could have stressed on a ceasefire and at least achieved that. A ceasefire would have created an even more conducive ground for the two sides to hold a conversation. Because if we are seeing continued hostilities taking place, even just ahead of the summit, we saw aggressive posturing and aggression by both the Russian side, as well as we saw the Ukrainian side also responding. So where does that, leave any scope for the two warring sides to talk? And therefore, some people may be disappointed with the fact that President Trump could not today get President Putin to at least cease hostilities till such time as the conversation with all the sides takes place. I think that would have been a low-hanging fruit that could have been achieved in this meeting, but it wasn't. President Trump, had said initially that this would be perhaps a listening exercise when he was toning down the expectations from the meeting, and that's how it has turned out to be. He heard the Russian president. The Russian president's, remarks about Ukraine being brotherly. Again, there is skepticism around those issues as well, because again, it harks back to certain points that have been made in the past and in the context of the imperialistic ambitions, perhaps, because Ukraine being part of the old Soviet. Also, the vague theological idea, because Kiev itself is very critical to the identity of Russia. So, in that context, of course, Russia would call Ukraine brotherly, but then the 3.5-year-long war against Ukraine tells another story. So matters still remain complicated, Gauri. Once the call is made to President Zelensky and to officially NATO is informed of what discussions took place, we'll get a better understanding of where things are headed.
Let's listen in to what Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin said in terms of as and when those talks will take place. Remember, that's the big takeaway. While the mood was positive, they've laid the groundwork. But what happens next? A summit in Moscow, not ruled out. Let's listen in.
Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all.
Okay, now let's also get in Vladimir Putin in terms of Russian connections with Alaska. There's a certain reason why Alaska played host to this very important summit and something that was aired by the Russian president. Listen in.
As I've said, the situation in Ukraine has to do with fundamental threats to our security. Moreover, we've always considered the Ukrainian nation, and I've said it multiple times, a brotherly nation, however strange it may sound in these conditions. We have the same roots, and everything that's happening is a tragedy for us and terrible wound. Therefore, the country is sincerely interested in putting an end to it. At the same time, we're convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots, the primary causes of that conflict. And we've said it multiple times, to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance of security in Europe and in the world on the whole. And I agree with President Trump, as he has said today, that naturally the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. Naturally, we're prepared to work on that.
Let's play out exactly what Donald Trump said. It was a very short briefing, the press statements that were issued by the two leaders. Listen into exactly what the American president said and how it lays the groundwork for the next steps as far as ending the conflict.
I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite got there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They're going to have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here, Scott and John Radcliffe, thank you very much. But we have some of our really great leaders. They've been doing a phenomenal job. We also have some tremendous Russian business representatives here, and I think, everybody wants to deal with us. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world in a very short period of time, and we look forward to that. We look forward to dealing. We're going to try and get this over with. We really made some great progress today. I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin, with Vladimir. We had many tough meetings, good meetings. We were interfered with by the Russia hoax that made it a little bit tougher to deal with, but he understood it. I think he's probably seen things like that during the course of his career. He's seen it all, but we had to put up with the Russia hoax. He knew it was a hoax, and I knew it was a hoax, but What was done was very criminal, but it made it harder for us to deal as a country in terms of the business and all of the things that we'd like to have dealt with. But we'll have a good chance when this is over. So just to put it very quickly, I'm going to start making a few phone calls and tell them what happened. But we had an extremely productive meeting, and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. I would like to thank President Putin and his entire team, who I know in many cases, other than that, whose faces I get to see all the time in the newspapers. You're almost as famous as the boss, but especially this one right over here. But we had some good meetings over the years, right? Good, productive meetings over the years, and we hope to have that in the future. But let's do the most productive one right now. We're going to stop really 5, 6, 7,000, thousands of people a week from being killed, and President Putin wants to see that as much as I do. So, again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you.
All right, we played out what Donald Trump said after that meeting ended. He said that thousands of people are being killed in Ukraine, and he and the Russian president want to end this conflict. It ended with the potential trilateral that may take place in Moscow. How soon, we do not know. What will be the contours of that summit when it takes place? If it takes place in Moscow, we are not aware of that. Now, Vishal, as things stand right now, the big questions that we are putting out as well, which is that there is a display of intent here from both leaders that the conflict needs to end. It's just about on whose terms it will end. And if we were to just go by the limited messages that are being given, the limited messaging that is available right now, there is a possibility of a second summit taking place soon on Russian soil. Hasn't been ruled out by the American president right now. But this is also before he briefed his European allies. So they need to be on board as well. It's okay for a first round of laying the groundwork, optics kind of a meeting, which is what this may have potentially been. But anything that is about specifics cannot be on Russian soil.
That's exactly right. And so far, European leaders have been on the corner of Ukraine for months now. Because Zelensky, Ukrainian leaders, the top leaders in Ukraine, they were all sidelined for months when Trump had a public spat with Zelensky. Back then also, European leaders were standing in the corner of Ukraine. That seems to be the case now also, because we had seen that right before this big Alaska summit, there was a meeting, there was a phone call between European leaders, Trump and Zelensky, on which European leaders had clearly suggested that Zelensky, Ukraine leaders, they all need to be at the table when there is a big agreement for the Ukraine war. That hasn't happened. Zelensky was not even invited. So if that changes, that will be the biggest development, and Europe will have played a huge part. So far, it's been sort of a spectator of sorts. It has not been able to call the shots. But if that changes, Europe will have, emerged victorious in its, quest to have Ukraine side heard, because Ukraine side has not been, been able to put its point across on the highest table, which is, at the moment occupied by both Putin and Trump. So if that happens, whether Zelensky will agree to a big trilateral in Moscow, that is also a big question. Whether Trump will also agree, that is also a big question, because both these leaders will feel quite uncomfortable going to the Russian soil. That because history doesn't, say that U.S. or Ukraine leaders will easily go to the U.S. soil, Russian soil. So all of that will have to be thrashed out. But for now, we've been saying that these are some positive signs. So we'll take the takeaways do seem to be positive. So that's what we have to conclude.
Indeed, from the sidelines, will then Europe now become part, a key stakeholder for any potential peace formula to be thrashed out. Now, Maha, you've been at Anchorage the last, in fact, 2 days there. You've spoken to people there. You're getting a sense of how things have panned out. There is a sense of positivity, which is the largest takeaway from this summit as it ends. In your sense, how do things go from here on a broader basis?
Well, it does appear that there are several points on which, as President Trump himself said, that there has been an agreement. He specifically mentioned one point, which one would be curious to know. He said that there is one aspect on which we'd almost reached an agreement but haven't been able to. What is that one point? Was it about a ceasefire, which they haven't been able to achieve? Or was it some other significant point? We'll again have to wait to see when the NATO and President Zelensky are spoken to about this issue. But one can say that if at all several points have been agreed upon, as has been expressed by President Donald Trump, then there is a likelihood of a second meeting, as he has pointed out, where Ukraine will also be a part. This was an odd meeting of sorts.
Maha, let me interrupt you there. Maha, let me interrupt you there because we're getting live visuals right now that of the departure of Vladimir Putin. He has embarked emplaned right now on his aircraft, and now he's heading back, departing from Alaska back to Russia, back to Moscow after concluding that important summit in Alaska. Viewers, these are live visuals that you're seeing right here. First from Anchorage in Alaska, where the Russian president has boarded his aircraft and he's now set to go back to Russian territory. Remember, Alaska is just 55 miles away from Russian territory. The closest link between America and Russia is Alaska. The historical aspects to it, Vladimir Putin himself pointed out, from the Orthodox Russian churches to several other historical linkages. Right now, he's boarded the plane. Those are live visuals coming in. He'll now head back to Moscow. Every reason to believe that he heads back with some positive takeaways and some would say even big wins for him. The first meeting between him and President Trump since the conflict started. First meeting on American soil in a decade. He actually got to speak longer than the American president. He got to speak first before the American president. He was on American soil, and he's invited the American president to now come to Russia. So those are the big wins for Vladimir Putin as he now heads back home, continues the war. The military momentum, many feel, is still with the Russian forces right now, and that momentum may just, I use the word may because remember, it's a war. Every assault, every grinding assault takes a human toll. But as things stand right now, there is a military momentum that Russia has, and those forces are set to get that even more. The fillip with the sense of positivity and wins that Russian president may want to take with him as he heads back. All right. Maha Siddiqui and Vishal Vivek, my colleagues, have been with us through the broadcast. Have been as we've been getting you every detail as far as this big story is concerned.